So today on the Your Law Firm Success podcast, I'm talking to Callum Murray, the CEO and founder of Amiqus. Many of you will be aware of Amiqus. It's essentially a sort of software as a service business which assists with the onboarding and money laundering requirements that law firms have to satisfy when taking on new clients. It's literally transformed that market. Callum's been in a fairly incredible journey from painter decorator to the owner and operator of a SaaS business in the legal tech sector, which is now employing nearly 70 people and turning over about 6 million with the objective of getting to 50 million. I hope you enjoy this episode and Callum's views on legal tech and the market in general. Thanks very much for coming in to see me today. We were meant to be chatting as well with Danae from Vala, but unfortunately she's had a migraine, so we've had to sort of adapt things a little bit. Firstly, can you tell me a little bit about Amiqus?
Yes. Founding story?
Founding story would be excellent. I know it's a long story because we met, well, not a lot, it's an exciting story, but we met a number of years ago, I think, for the first time, just after, it certainly wasn't long after you'd begun to get it going.
Yeah, that'd be right. So there's a condensed version.
No, do it, whatever. So we can cut it afterwards.
The purpose and the reason for being, like how it all came around, was my own experience in trying to find and access legal services. Like, how do you get help? How do you solve a problem? The problem I had was fundamentally a commercial one, not a legal one. But it was using the law to try and solve the problem. So going to court to try and get money back that was due. And I didn't know how complicated it was going to be, how time consuming, how expensive, and ultimately the outcome. So I was running a painting and decorating business. It was financial crash time, so 2007-ish. And I was due money from bigger companies. I was a really small company, about 10 people. And we got set up with £1,000 from the Prince's Scottish Business Trust. And we got going and we started to scale. Things were going well. And then we were due money from much larger contractors who had their own cash flow issues. And based on where we came in the overall contract cycle, the end, we were the last package to get paid out. And in one case, the main contractor went bust, disappeared. And in another one, they just refused to pay us. And I felt a bit hard done by. We had done the job, we'd done the work, we did what we said we would do. We didn't get paid. So in one case, there was an arbitration clause in the contract. I didn't know what arbitration was at the time. I didn't know that mediation existed. I didn't know what out-of-court dispute resolution mechanisms really were. Only when I went to look at the contract to find out why they're not paying us, what can we do about it? So through my experience of trying to solve those problems, that led to the challenges that I'd faced at the time, and thought, surely you should be able to do this digitally. You should be able to find a review of a law firm. Like, who would be the law firm that I should find to do this outside of, paid radio campaigns or whatever? How could I find and qualify who I should work with? And it was tough. Like, you couldn't do anything digitally then. And through that experience, that was, we're going to have to fix it. The judiciary isn't going to fix it. I couldn't see law firms fixing it. There wasn't anything on the market at the time. So I thought, I'm going to do it myself. So that was the basis of it. How could you go and do it? And initially, we had no funding, no support. There wasn't really anything there.
So hold on a wee minute. So you basically went from the situation of being in a commercial dispute. Because the work had been done, you had sort of no leverage apart from your agreement. In one case, the person had gone out of business. In the second case, the company was just refusing to pay you.
Yeah.
But you're running a painting and decorating business.
Yeah.
And then you start thinking about, how can I solve this access to justice issue? Now, there must be a gap between that and then what you were about to talk about was getting funding. You must have had to do quite a bit of preparatory work around what your idea actually was and fleshing it out.
Yeah. I didn't understand at the time how broken up the process was, all the problems to solve along the way. But I knew that by pulling together the right mixture of people, we would be able to go and tackle the problem. So I had faced the issue myself individually, but would need to find other people who had the right level of skills or expertise. In the same way in the painting business was, when I started that, I had been at uni studying business entrepreneurship, but I was working as a labourer on building sites, effectively filling rubble bags, doing whatever was required. And then I spotted at the time that a lot of the admin and the project management was typically done by one trade, but they would be fantastic at whatever they did. It could be, you know, a cabinet maker would be on site building something inside a bar, and they would be amazing at delivering that part, but they would then struggle to scale their business because they weren't covering off the administration side of it or the sales side or the marketing side, but they were brilliant at what they did. So in the same way in the painting, the model was, well, we could get started. I went and got the textbook from college about painting and decorating, and it's effectively chemistry. Like, does this thing stick to this thing? What's the substrate? What's the product you're putting on top? And was able to apply that and do various kind of on-the-job training type stuff, and then start to employ people who were very well qualified time-served painters and decorators. And then I would take care of the client care. We would do all of the admin, like look after the other side of the business. So I recognised the same thing, that if I was to build this business and solve this problem, we're going to need a range of different people to help and support. So tried to break the problem down into the different component parts. And initially, we got some support building out a very basic prototype, which was the initial search stage. So when you have to triage and understand what kind of problem do you have, what kind of area of the law would be applicable, is there case law in relation to this, we started to build out something to solve that part. So the very initial stage of what is the problem I have, and you know, where should I go, what should I do? And to do that part, we worked with Strathclyde University, and I got a fellowship from the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So in effect, I had a year's salary. I think it was paid 30 grand as a person employed by them. It was part of their scheme. So it was a fellowship scheme where I then had access to different researchers and bits of the universities to kind of effectively work on the problem whilst you had the salary, so I could still pay rent. At that time, like post the business, the paint and decorating business failed. We had to pay back HMRC, the banks, various creditors. So effectively, we didn't get any money from the following through in the court process. We got a judgment, but there were no assets to draw down on. And on the arbitration one, they counterclaimed we couldn't continue the arbitration process. It was too expensive. So in effect, I was at that time living at a friend's flat and had to pay rent. So the job or the fellowship that I got was just enough to pay the rent and get the idea going. So we had the very early stages of that through the support from, it was at the time the Data Lab, which is now far more advanced than when we were one of the first applicants to get a grant from that. They helped us cover off the cost that we had to work with the academics in the universities. And we built out a basic search which would allow you to look at publicly available court information, so case law effectively to some extent, and then legislation, so what's published online, like open available legislation. So we were looking at the Consumer Rights Act, which had recently been updated at the time. So in effect, you could say, I bought a car within the last 2 weeks, the gearbox failed. It would then pull up the right area of the Consumer Rights Act and say, okay, here's what you're entitled to, or what the law says or the legislation says in relation to that. And then using what we could get, case law, to say, actually, there have been a number of cases that have set a precedent in this type of area. Here's roughly where you would go. Now you need legal help. So what we wanted to do was triage the stuff at the start to tell people, well, actually, the problem you've had is very, very common, and you could follow this route. So you could think about maybe commoditized areas like, I don't know, claims against airlines, or there'd be various things that you could maybe tackle. When we did that and we built the very basic thing at the very beginning, we thought that was the way to go. We would funnel out or create opportunities for law firms, pass them to law firms and say, here's a pre-qualified opportunity from Callum over here. We know who he is. Here's his scenario. Here's a kind of brief, pass it on to them. But all of the law firms that we then approached said, well, actually, the cost to acquire these new clients is really high because we need to go through this risk-based process, this anti-money laundering process, this onboarding process, and it's paper-based, and you need to bring the client in, and the risk is that this could be getting us caught up in some sort of fraud or organised crime. The value is low. We probably couldn't deal with it just at the volume. So they effectively said, like, if you build a system that can help us do that and make that much more streamlined and better, then we'll buy that. So we thought, well, maybe we'll just build that and we'll come back to the other stuff. So we put all of the work that we had on hold in relation to supporting the open publishing of case law, which is still a really difficult area.
Yes.
It's really challenging. There's loads of IP around it. There's all sorts of entrenched kind of situations going on there, how it's managed, how it gets published, the data format, and how can you do anything with it. So we paused all of that and said, right, we'll come back to that. But ultimately the intention with Amiqus is make it fast and easy for people to get access to legal help. That was it. And the problem that I had was I didn't get it. I didn't speak to a solicitor early enough or know how much that was going to cost to get a little bit of advice early on and say, do you know what? You're probably really upset about this. You were right, but in fact, what's going to happen here is you're not going to get anything. You need to walk away now, and you should seek advice and, like, you know, wrap up the business, do that, you know, manage that properly. That ideally would have been the message that I got from someone in the very beginning, but we didn't. And that then led into the whole process and the business failing. The business likely would have failed anyway. That was more of mistakes made along the way around concentration risk for, like, big clients. You know, clients didn't pay us.
The painting and decorating business would have failed anyway.
I think ultimately because the financial crash had happened, that was out with our control. We had, what we did control though were who were the large clients. We thought that the clients who we'd put in that were like big rocks, like you would have lots of little job residential bits of work, but the big kind of cash flow would come from the larger clients, potentially naively thinking we would get paid all of that and get paid on time or get paid to contract. That was the assumption, and that was wrong. So the business, ultimately failed, but the intention was, if it failed for me, someone who had lived here all my life with a network, you know, I'm not really coming from a disadvantaged background as such. I speak the language, like I'm from here, and I couldn't navigate my way to do that, then there must be hundreds of thousands of other people who are in the same or a more difficult position. Not particularly in consumer rights or like in, you know, a dispute where you're going to use litigation, but just all sorts of things that go on. And a lot of those things that we've started to unravel or find as we've gone along the journey with Amiqus.
Yeah, I think at that time that you're talking about, certainly the extent to which law firms were marketing themselves online, and I know because we were right at the beginning of that, is that it was a green field at that time, and actually being able to find the type of legal information that now you could find very readily through searching on Google as to who might be the right company to help you, what are your likely chances of success. We're living in a sort of different world from that point of view, and I also know how difficult it is to get into a situation where you are generating leads for lawyers and you're able to arrange a commercial relationship on the back of that. Is quite a difficult thing unless it's in very specific categories such as personal injury, etc. But so you decided to pivot your idea at that point on the basis of early feedback, and you've drilled down more into the anti-money laundering aspect and removing that as an obstacle from lawyers, that's in the way of lawyers taking on new clients. So you told me a wee bit about how that started, but a bit more information on your sort of business plan, getting some funding together, and where you are now. How many years later? What was that like?
8 years ago.
8 years ago.
8 years ago, yeah. So how we actually got it going from that point, we didn't have anything. So we had no funding. It wasn't as though I was coming from a great exit from a previous business or anything like that. I'd come from doing voluntary work for Citizens Advice in the Sheriff Court. So at the time I was trying to figure out what exactly is going on when people are going to court, whether it's small claims or otherwise. And I had some knowledge around that, so I kind of built up some expertise around, you know, what was going on, and that was particularly around mediation. So how were people resolving things, what were they doing? But we never had any capital. We had goodwill, like, so I had a network of people who were able to help or support. Scotland is in a really positive position from an early funding kind of landscape for early stage businesses. So grant funding, early stage angel syndicates, that type of thing exist, and they have done for a long time. So we were able to tap into that and followed a well-trodden path, which is Scottish Edge. It's a funding competition to support early stage businesses. We got about £100,000 over a range of applications through that, which was supported by Scottish Government. It was John Swinney at the time who backed it. RBS and the Hunter Foundation put that together, and we benefited from that. So it was a grant that we got, and there was a portion of loan which we paid back. So having gone through and pitched through that process, or various other things that exist, like EI's another one, still goes on today. So it's an investors conference that you present your business idea, you know, pitch what you're doing, you get a 6-minute slot to do that on a stage. Did that, picked up some early stage support there, and really it was angel investment type funding. So people who are able to access tax breaks through HMRC, a scheme called EIS, where you can get some income tax written off against the risk of your investment. So we raised some very early angel money from others who are new. A couple of people who were involved in the Prince's Trust originally, Prince's Scottish Youth Business Trust. One of them had sold the business to 𝐚𝐯𝐸𝐿, who make card point of sale products. So when you're paying contactless, they'd sold the business to them, and they then got bought by PayPal. So a couple of the earliest investors had said, "Oh, really, like, don't really understand what you're doing. You think this is going to go somewhere," and, you know, put in a little bit of money. Someone else had sold their business to FanDuel, a big kind of online fantasy sports business, who are still around today in a different form. But we got early support from individuals who were in that position, who had either started, sold their business, that were doing technology type businesses. And that was the basis of it to really get started. We didn't have any paying customers, so we weren't bringing in any revenue initially, and we had to get over that first maybe 18 months of really not having much in the way of overheads to actually start the business. But we had very early support from
When you say we, were you doing it with somebody else?
When I set it up, there were others. So there was myself, Catherine, who was our accountant at the time and had the painting business. She came on to the business. We had Rick and Steve, who were based in Cambridge, who one was an engineer, one was a designer. They had their own little agency in Cambridge building websites and different products for people. We had Robbie, who was a product manager. He's now at Meta. He's been there for a long time. Previously at Free Agent, who were a fintech business, accountancy business based in Scotland, who had grown across the UK and got bought ultimately by RBS. They had listed on AIM. He was in there and had been through some of that journey. And then someone who he knew, Doug, he had been based in infrastructure and server-side security and banking.
This sounds like a complicated initial setup.
It was. So there were 5 others plus me. And I basically went to them all and said, look, we're going to need a range of expertise to be able to get this going. This is a complex problem we're going to have to try and solve. I'm not going to be able to do it myself. I didn't have an engineering background, but to bring together product, engineering, design, security and finance, it looked like that would be a good mix to begin with. So usually it's CEO, CTO, that's it. Like, that's just the usual model. You've got someone on the technical side, so chief technical officer, and then chief exec. But I'd said, well, actually, we're going to need to do this differently. So when we set it up, we said, right, we'll allocate 10% of all of the shares to that founding group. They weren't all able to give up what they were doing full time, so they all had various things going on, commitments, families, jobs, mortgages. I didn't have any of those things. So I'd said, well, I'm going to go all in. I'll have 90% of the shares. We'll allocate 10% across you all, so you all have 2%. That will change over time, but you need to trust that I'll grow the business and I'll bring in the external investment. So the value of this will be exponentially different from today, but you will always have your 2%. So it's quite common in early stage technology businesses that you have like an EMI scheme or a share option scheme, and that's the most tax efficient way of doing that. But you've got an option on those shares. But instead we said, well, that might be the case, but you could, leave in 6 months and have nothing more to do with Amiqus. But for this initial period, like, it's really important that everyone's incentivized to be involved. You're not going to be here all day, 7 days a week, that I'm going to be putting in, but that's how we're going to run it. So everyone agreed, and we allocated 10% elsewhere, and then we started to build from that point. So we had the right type of people around who could guide and help us avoid making bad mistakes or doing stupid things early on, and then we've grown it from there. We're now about 65 people at the moment, and we'll be growing a bit more this year as well.
And so tell me a bit more now about the Amiqus service, what it helps law firms do, what the benefits are of it, and also around the sort of revenue growth and sort of share structure that you have now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we effectively provide a software platform into lots of law firms. There's maybe about 600 law firms around the UK, like 9 out of 10 of the biggest ones in Scotland all have Amiqus sitting behind the scenes to some extent. And we help them manage their compliance challenges, whether that's onboarding new clients, so covering off all the AML challenges they'll have, whether that's policies, controls and procedures, risk assessment, and building that in. Typically we'll integrate with other case management systems or practice management systems, and we'll help them cover off the full client journey. So when they're doing the onboarding or client inception, client intake, client opening, like whatever terminology is applied in whichever firm, that's all the steps from capturing a document, source of funds, source of wealth. It'll cover off all of the PEP sanctions and adverse media checks. So as the regulations evolve, we stay ahead of that, provide all the requirements that a law firm will need to meet, whether they're a sole practitioner, a high street firm, or a multinational. So we've got clients across the full spectrum, and it's really important for us to be accessible for small law firms based on the amount of consolidation that's going on. It's important that to be able to transact, and the cost to transact shouldn't be prohibitive through compliance, because there are a lot of things you now need to do. So it's important for us that smaller law firms can still do the right thing. And typically small law firms are the ones that are at highest risk, because if I was an organised crime gang or I was trying to commit fraud, I'm not going to go to one of the largest law firms, because you would assume they've got systems in place. So typically smaller ones are at higher risk, because they're going to have people take a pop or have a go and think, oh, we'll try and put this transaction through this smaller firm. But so that's in effect what we help them do, make it faster and easier. A great client experience is one side, but on the other it's significantly reduce the risk attached to taking on the new clients and making that viable through the software.
And so you said you've gone from 0 to 65. How's your revenue tracking, or from that point of view?
Yeah, from a revenue point of view, early on it was pretty tough. It was really hard. Like, we were selling into a difficult regulated market, and initially there's a lot of skepticism, correctly, to be like, oh, are you able to do this? Is this really the best way of doing it? Maybe we should get our clients to come in for a coffee and have a chat. The client doesn't really want to come in for a coffee and a chat when they're selling their flat or moving home or getting access to advice. They want the face-to-face advice. They don't want the admin. So there was initially a bit of skepticism and like challenge to get past. So early revenues were tricky. Probably for the first couple of years, there wasn't really so much going on revenue-wise.
Was that tough? Was that hard?
Yeah, really difficult, because you've set expectations with investors to say, we're going to go off and do all these things, we're going to grow. And when you set a high expectation and you miss it, that's of your own making, and that's, difficult.
And how were those conversations?
Difficult, yeah. We've had loads of board meetings where it was like, we're going to turn the corner here. How are we going to figure this out? What are you going to do? The clock's ticking. The amount of money that you're using on a monthly basis, you're burning all this cash. That's not going to go on for forever. In different places, businesses are funded differently as well. So the appetite to risk here and the amount of early stage investment you'll get is different if you're in the US. But there are pros and cons. Like, there's loads of reasons why being in the UK is a great place to be. Also in Scotland, specifically for the Angel Network, and there's various other things that are really positive, but there's some things that are a challenge. The amount of cash you've got and the amount of time you've got to prove you're going somewhere is less. So that was hard. So that was probably the first little while when you're proving yourself out. And then after that, like the last 5 years, we've doubled revenue every year. So we've went double, 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 double. And as we've been doing that, that's then proven that, well, we are going somewhere and we are, making progress. So Deloitte do a ranking every year of technology companies, and we've been in the Fast 50 the last 2 years. So one of the fastest growing technology businesses in the UK, 22 and 23, and then in Scotland we were the fastest, and I think the third fastest the year just gone by. And that's based on a 4-year revenue growth. So look at a point in time 4 years ago, what was your base revenue there and what's the percentage growth to now? So for us it's great because it's not like a judging panel saying, oh yeah, you're a nice company, you're a good company. What would be do the right thing and be seen as like an ethical, well-run business. But with the Fast 50, for us, that was a line in the sand to say we can behave, and we're purpose-driven, we behave in the right way, we do the right thing, we look after our clients. And as a result, we're growing really quickly as well. So that's the last few years, and the FT or Financial Times do a ranking of the EU, and we're in the top quarter of fastest growing companies, of the 1,000 fastest growing companies in the EU. And that one went across all sectors, and we were like 45th, I think, across all sectors for the UK. So we know as a benchmark we're doing well. And more recently there's a UK government programme called Future 50, and that's the fastest growing or highest potential growth stage business that go in a kind of cohort approach. And there's a bunch of businesses like Zoopla, Skyscanner, Gusto, like a random mixture across sectors, and we've just joined that. So for us, that was a great kind of line in the sand to say we're making good progress, and revenue growth is part of it, but ultimately the revenue comes as a result of lots of other work. So I would always refer to it as being like a lagging indicator. You need to do loads of good things before the revenue is going to catch up. So there have been years where we still spend more money than we make at the moment, so we're not yet profitable, and that's something we're like really focused on right now. So the external investment we've got, the capital invested by other investors, which now is like bigger funds and other people, but the big push is be sustainable, be at a point where we've got free cash flow as opposed to growing and using external investment to grow. So we don't use a lot now, but revenue for this year should be about 6 million from an annual recurring basis.
And how's that from a mindset point of view? Because, I've always thought to a certain extent in Scotland and the UK, one can have a mindset as you need to be making money from the word go, whereas that's not possible. And I imagine that was the same in your painting and decorating business. You were like, right, I'm doing this because I want to make money. I'll pay the guys to do the job, and hopefully there's money left over the top that makes this all worthwhile for me.
Yeah. The margin in the painting and decorating was about 6% or 7% when you took into account everything.
Yeah.
Margin in software is completely different.
Yeah.
Again, we're delivering a completely different thing. So different service, like a load of automation. So the costs for us are primarily people. So 85% of our cost, although we provide software, it's implementation, it's onboarding, it's engineers, it's user researchers, designers. So almost all of our cost is people. So continuing to invest into our people, growing the team, that grows ahead of revenue. So we make investment into the product or platform, different things we're doing to make sure that we can provide a reliable, secure service to all of our clients. It's critical to them. So in addition to legal, we serve the UK government, the Scottish government, the NHS. All of the National Health Service equivalent, HSC in Northern Ireland, runs on Amiqus. So there's a big responsibility for us to continue to invest into the platform and obviously our people and thinking about what they're doing, whether it's someone in a risk and compliance role. At the moment, we're hiring for in-house counsel. So actually bringing in someone who's a solicitor into the business at this stage is part of the plan. So making those investments are really important, but that costs money. So in effect, getting that right, from the perspective of, you know, being in Scotland and thinking you need to be profitable, and, you know, that's a big thing. That's different now than in the last few years. So in the US, or like you would typically hear, grow at all costs. We've never kind of gone for that mantra. It's always been, yeah, we're going to grow, but not at all costs. We're going to grow and grow sustainably. So we will use cash, but we'll use it to a point that we know that it's not going to run away from us, that we're going to be at the point where we're just burning so much money that we're going to have to do massive layoffs or like some big change internally to try and get back on track. So we've never done things in that way, but always conscious of the fact that there are others out there who've gone off and raised tens of millions or more, and they've got a really, really high burn rate, and they're nowhere near getting to a sustainable point. Now the economy's flipped, and, you know, the interest rate scenario's changed, the funding environment's changed. You see, particularly in the US, like a huge shift where there's been massive layoffs, and loads of large tech companies as well, listed businesses, got that same approach. We've not been caught in that because of how we've been run and the approach that we've had. So thankfully it's switched and it's kind of playing in our favour, where, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, if you said you're growing fast enough, it would be you need to be tripling or quadrupling, or you're not in that top quartile. And that's changed now to say, well, you need to be growing, but you need to be efficient as well.
So I think that's because you're from Edinburgh, you're a bit like Tyson.
I'm from Bowness, but about halfway in the middle. So usually people maybe initially struggle to say, oh, where are you from? Like, what's going on there? And are you from Glasgow? Like, no, clearly I don't have a Glaswegian accent, but equally I don't have an Edinburgh accent. But I think maybe there's a blend of I am Scottish, but the business is across the UK. So we've got lots of clients doing different things in different sectors across the UK. But yeah, fundamentally, we were started in Edinburgh. We've got an office in Edinburgh, and now I live there. But there's probably something built in that I don't know whether it's feeling like the underdog or like the skepticism, whether that's maybe quite a healthy thing to think, actually, are you going to get this done? Are you going to do it? Or the assumption that they probably won't amount to much. That's maybe like an inbuilt Scottish psyche thing.
Yeah, I think it's something that can be helpful if understood. But you know, I understand that you work across different sectors now, but the way that I viewed it was you started off as being a sort of legal tech business as you're addressing a legal issue. And I started off in sort of legal tech, but in the same way that you describe, I was too advanced at that time, and actually the market and the mindset and the view of what technology could do is far from what it is now. What do you think of legal tech in Scotland and the UK? What impact do you think it's going to have on lawyers going forward? I mean, you might not even care. And you've also tied up with Vala recently, so it'd be nice to have a wee bit of a chat about that as well.
Yeah. So legal tech in the UK, I'd say, has equivalence as anywhere. Like, so might not have as big as budgets like applied to some of the companies, so they won't maybe get as much funding, but there's certainly a load of activity. So Law Tech UK, there's a bunch going on. Vala have been involved in that to some extent. We're involved with Law Scot Tech and have been for a number of years, so sit on that board to provide a view as a participant or as a company who are a legal tech company supporting hundreds of law firms. So we were able to give that, you know, sector-specific view as opposed to coming from a primarily legal background, although that board is really broad. There's input from people across the whole profession. So I think there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of other, maybe in the past, been a bit hype around, and again, maybe the Scottish scepticism there of like, oh, how is this actually going to change the practice of law? But you could look at examples like Clio is probably the biggest one. 60,000, maybe 70,000 law firms who run on their product. That's across like North America, EMEA, they're moving in Asia Pacific as well. They've got a presence across the UK. So there are significant businesses who are within like the legal tech space. You've obviously got lots of big, large incumbents who've been around for a long time doing things, but smaller companies come along and saying, well, we could do that. We could offer that service. We could improve upon that and make something faster and easier for a solicitor or for paralegals or for other areas. There's definitely software out there that's pitched at whether it's barristers or advocates. There's stuff now that should make life easier for people who are involved in the practice of law, whether you're a solicitor or otherwise. Our side touches it could be paralegals. A lot of the time there'll be partners who are involved in sign off for taking on new clients, who will accept the risk of, we're taking this client on, here's the background, and they're part of that process. So people across a law firm, whether if you're a bigger law firm, you'll be in a risk and compliance role, or maybe the money laundering reporting officer, you're going to be interacting with software to do that. There's a bunch of people who maybe pivoted towards what we are doing now, who have done other things in the past in another area of like legal or legal tech. So there's certainly not a shortage. It looks like just more and more and more coming around, whether it's directly in relation to contract analysis tools. There's loads of things that have been around for a long time. Probably the shift now is the adoption, that law firms are actually getting to go past a proof of concept or past a thinking about a few people involved in innovation. It's more like knowledge management lawyers and bigger law firms who are proactively saying, how can we better harness the value we've got of the senior people here who are not going to be here forever, and as they pass on, obviously there's the model where you're going to progress through from a trainee up into a partner level, but how can we make more of the information as an asset? What's technology got to play in that? And that seems to be a really big shift. So people are now looking at what systems and processes they can put in that are valuable. They're going to add value either for them internally, from an efficiency point of view, or what improvements can they make for their client, making their client experience better. And it's really wide ranging. There's products right across the board from all different aspects of when you're going to interact with legal services. The example, so that's maybe a bit about like the market or how things have evolved. I've certainly seen a huge change, particularly maybe the last 5 years. There's been many, many more companies around who are created specifically targeting like legal services or to support lawyers. There's probably been a few outliers that have come along and said, oh yeah, we are going to replace the law firm. I think that's going to happen. I think the point being the trusted advisor is just always going to be there. So like, yeah, we're a technology company, but if we want advice on like a particular topic, we're not going to get that online from a self-help, clickable bit of content. You'd maybe start there, but you then want the senior person to come in afterwards and give you their experience and give you context, and
also to be able to ask you the right questions, which I think sometimes, that's moved on to this discussion of sort of AI and replacing lawyers. My experience of it is that, or when I've required legal advice, is that, I've had legal training and I understand a lot of it myself. However, you have to get asked the right questions, because you could be going down a route in terms of your searches that you think is right, but in fact you've missed out something quite fundamental that entirely changes the whole complexion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the challenge, is that through years and years or decades of experience in seeing these types of problems, people will be able to spot those types of scenarios. So whilst you could use a system, whether it's rules-based or it's an AI system or whatever it might be, there's always going to be that requirement for the human in the loop to be adding that level of expertise to say, well, actually, that's all good and well, but this other element over here that's not been taken into account, because you need to ask the question and have the conversation or have the prior knowledge of like other scenarios to actually get involved. So I think as things improve, like the size of data sets get bigger, like their access, their training these systems is going to always just increase. I see it more like the Microsoft model, where they've intentionally come out and called their system Copilot. it's that type of scenario where we'd more likely see a large, whether it's a Magic Circle firm, Silver Circle, or like can you start coming down, they'll have their own systems that are trained upon all of their internal data. They're very, very, very unlikely to ever let that go anywhere outside the walls of their firm. But you would see them having their own proprietary systems that are trained up with their senior partners and whoever else that's been around for however many decades that are adding in their, insights to those systems. So you would access a system that you're probably going to pay more for a Slaughter and May example, or you pick any number of law firm, because you would know that, well, this has been trained upon all of their internal processes, and there'll be certain areas of the law, if you're the world leading expert in shipping disputes, then someone's going to have that type of dispute, that type of problem. They're going to come to your law firm because they know that those people are there, and obviously the system will do some of the heavy lifting early on. Still going to want to talk to the person. We still speak to people when we are going through like different things like funding. Yeah, you can automate out contract review steps, but ultimately there's a range of questions that you need to ask, and you're going to go back to that partner who's ran hundreds and hundreds of these transactions.
So you will see a lot, or certainly there's a segment of the legal society that is very sceptical about the use of AI, and particularly OpenAI. Now, I completely get that, because I think the opportunity for hallucination, shared data, etc. However, what we're talking about here, which I think is the area that is going to be subject to biggest change and biggest opportunity for firms, is actually the understanding that the vast majority of legal advice is actually given privately and never ends up in the public domain. And the reasoning and the rationale behind that should exist on proprietary systems, and it will really be the training of AI on those systems that will allow lawyers or practitioners to access, recover, regurgitate and exchange that information, or format it into a way in which it can be communicated with a client based on their prior experience. Where the biggest opportunity, I think, exists for law firms and will mean that they don't end up becoming obsolete. Is that something that you'd agree with?
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree. I think that's exactly how I'd see it's going to go. The issues with some of the systems, whether they've just not been through the courts yet. Like this point about you've scraped all this information, how much of it's proprietary? Like question mark, how much of it's breaching copyright, or NDAs or stuff that's going on? Like how has it been leaked, or where have you got it from? That's just a huge unanswered question. So for someone to jump in and start using insert AI product, it's really risky, depending on what you're using it for. So if you're using it as an internal wiki to like find out what is our policy on XYZ, or what's the general approach to doing this thing, fine. If the chef in your law firm is using it to find recipes to make a nice brunch for your partners, like great, that's maybe a good use.
And we have lawyers worried that AI is going to render them obsolete. My view of it is that it actually might become the tool or the application that could end up freeing them from the billable hour scenario, and that you are able then to price jobs on the basis of value and on the basis of existing information that you have within your system, which would facilitate those lawyers to be able to sort of interrogate using AI with some reasoning and thought based on the information that they hold in with all their case management systems, to then be able to use that, read that quite quickly, and then be able to work out how they're then going to apply it to the situation, rather than spending all of that time working through it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that type of example is exactly why we're so excited to partner with Vala, where they're in the process of building out a system along those lines to particularly help people who would be at the edge of ever accessing legal help, because in their scenario, predominantly at the moment, it's employment type disputes where someone's been discriminated against, specifically, like that would be a scenario, and they either don't have the wherewithal, the funds, the cash to go away and seek kicking off a claim, or actually understand what their rights are. So the fact that they've got a system that they're developing which is helping people, they're not giving someone like legal advice, they've got advisors and they've got their system, and then ultimately they're guiding people who otherwise would be, pursuing something without any help at all, and they'd be going towards an employment tribunal situation, with one hand tied behind their back, because they really don't have a basis to start, or go from anywhere. And that use case or scenario is like great. Like, you're helping people out who otherwise would have very little prospect, or maybe it's not even, for them a conceivable like idea. It's like, how am I going to deal with this? You just accept, oh, I've been cut out, or whatever's happened in the workplace. Just need to move on, and they'll have the grievance, but they wouldn't know what to do. And it's not so much about, oh well, what's this going to mean for any employer? Like, this is a really bad thing for employers. It's like, well, employers should behave in the right way, that you're not going to tribunal all the time. Why are you behaving in such a way that someone feels like the grievance is so strong that they're going to do that? Will you find scenarios that people maybe try and abuse it? I'd imagine, but same thing will apply. Like, there'll be a way to like work your way through that. But overall for us, it just fits in. It suits perfect sense with our kind of values overall about how can we help people access legal help. And
it's a section of the market that otherwise might not be available to you as well, because they're not entering it.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen. And there's a huge unmet need when you think about what is going on within legal services. The people who would be potential users, but they either don't understand how they would interact with it, or they wouldn't have like the financial means to do it. Another example that we worked on with Glasgow University, we had Dr. Dot Reed, and it was in relation to succession and what happens in planning when you're going through the process of someone is trying to deal with like the death of a friend, family member. How are they actually working their way through the process to head towards court, and then actually manage, like, what do you do? How do you deal with managing the process, the formal process, when you're dealing with a will? And the research that it was in relation to reform, like, of law, like Dr. Reed's she's been working on that for maybe a decade, maybe longer, with other colleagues, looking at how the process could be improved and simpler for people. And what they found overwhelmingly was it was people from disadvantaged or vulnerable backgrounds who would get into disputes and have problems, because the assumption is someone's passed away, how are we going to split up all these assets, what are we going to do, what's the tax position, when does that kick in, where's the threshold? And it's a really complicated area, but there are effectively like calculations that are done to like figure out like what would happen here, where do the numbers go there, what happens for someone in that situation. And we were contacted by the uni to say, is this a project you might be interested in? We helped them out, built something out. It's been a pilot for some time. It's not something that's like a big public system, but the intention there was, well, we could provide the engineering and the design resource to help people create a self-serve tool that would help them understand what their rights were when you're going through the process of managing a death. And there's a bunch of other like legal tech companies around. 𝐸xCenter are doing loads of great work with lots of law firms around that as well. So we were helping people at the kind of triage stage there. And it's not something that's been broadly adopted, but the next step really is working with Scottish Government to help publicise, like, here's what you're able to do in Scotland when you're dealing with this tricky situation. But again, we would then just provide that to law firms to be like, yep, here's a way that you can help people at the very front end to understand, like, what could they do, like, how do they navigate their way, when do you then need the support of a solicitor to actually manage this process and then actually go through the court. So how do you submit all the information to court? How do you get this dealt with? And it's through a court clerk, effectively. So
in summary, the points for you are that, one, Amiqus was born from a desire to improve access to justice for all. that the technology advances that we see currently, and particularly around the deployment of AI, is less about making lawyers obsolete in any way, but is more about enabling access to the legal system from those who otherwise would have found it impossible. And therefore, for service, and in most cases, there's got to be a win-win, and therefore, from your tie-up with Vala, for example, you're able to then access a segment of the market that then has to go through the money laundering checks, etc., in order to access the legal services that previously would have never gone through that, because simply it was prohibitively expensive. In the employment law situation, you're not really getting no win, no fee. You've got to start paying from the bat. So really, the question is, how as a sector can we deploy technology in such a way so that more people are able to protect their basic legal rights who would otherwise have found it impossible?
Yeah, and I think it's a net win, because if we can give the tools, platforms, products, systems to law firms to be far more efficient and do things in a really robust way, then that's a great win for them. And equally, the other side of that, if you think of a two-sided market, you're then creating opportunities for people who otherwise wouldn't be thinking about going and talking to a lawyer, who would now be able to go and do that because we can support them. Like one example, we're partnered with the Scottish Refugee Council, and we're supporting them financially with equipment. So you imagine we work through a whole load of laptops, like you've got a bunch of engineers who are running through things, like they depreciate like to a point where it's negligible. Like that asset is gone, we do a new laptop, it's on a lease. So we'll run through equipment like that, it'll get wiped, it'll get cleared. And the Scottish Refugee Council run a new Scots programme, so it helps people who've recently arrived here, and they'll be highly qualified, but they will have left somewhere in like they're fled in danger, like they're at risk of persecution. There's like serious situation, they're fleeing, and they've arrived here to find safety for them and their family, and they might well be a dentist, and they arrive here and they can't work, they can't do anything, but they can't connect with anyone, they've got no means of communication. So we were able to just practically help them out, and so we can give that network of people who are new leaders for their communities, like who are arriving here, and give them equipment, like we can help them out. They can get the setup, the basic things that you would need to help out. So the finance bit, there's the equipment bit, and then the other side's the practical side, to say, well, how would we be able to support them, like people, someone who's navigating the asylum process, how could they help prove who they are and the credentials they've got? So for example, every single time that you go and try and open a bank account, or you go and try and get a job, or you try and get yourself back into society as we would know it, and like contribute, be around, like be part, like get yourself back on your feet, like you shouldn't have to relive the whole thing of, right, can you tell me this situation, that, what you're doing? Like we can provide the same technology that we've got, that we help like law firms or investors or whoever, like onboard and engage. We can flip that and give it to people who need it, and they can create a digital identity that's meeting all the UK Gov standards. They can access products and services as a result, but they need legal help. And there's a bunch of our clients who already provide pro bono legal help to Scottish Refugee Council and others. So we can help make the connection to say, well, here's what we can do. So we're a technology company. We're not going to solve the world, or but we can play a part in it, do the right thing, and we can help, because we build and grow and can have an impact. The bigger we are, the more impact we can have. And the more we grow, the more we can do to solve problems like that, whether it's we can help Vala scale up what they're doing, because we've got lots of law firms who already know who we are, and we can help connect them in. Equally, their product and service is brilliant. So there's a big net benefit for us. And with the Scottish Refugee Council or others, it's like we can help them out in ways, because we're just getting bigger and we can raise money for them. We can give them money, but predominantly we can help them help other people to access services, including legal help. So if they could get fast access to a solicitor and we can offset the cost, if they've got costs because they need a system to triage stuff or do things, and we can do that. So it means that there's a bit of a virtuous circle you can create overall. And ultimately, like, the reason we set Amiqus up was to help people access legal help. We need to build a scalable, profitable, successful business to do that, but it's a long-term thing. It's not, it's not something you can do within 6, 12, 18 months. So it's definitely a bit of a longer journey.
And just finally, what's the next stage for Amiqus?
Really, I think the stuff we've just touched on there around the two-sided marketplace, where it's critically important for us to be supporting the legal profession going forward. It's like the core of where we began. That's why we exist. So we're investing heavily in the platform. We've got the support of our external investors to continue to do that. So growing exponentially from where we are. The point in the journey we're talking about is from 5 to 50. So currently we're turning over a bit more than 5 million, but how do we accelerate past 50 million?
Okay.
So 10 times bigger than we are today. We can have 10 times more impact in doing that. In doing so, we then offer out support in other areas. So we've won a contract with the UK government for the next 6 years to support all employees who are going to be vetted to go into government. So it's a huge opportunity for us to deliver against that. So that's on the staff side. So as we continue to develop relationships and build partnerships on the staff onboarding side of the business, that's really big scale for us and huge opportunities. That then cycles back into the client side as well. So law firms need to verify and manage and vet all other staff as part of the money laundering regulations. They also need to take on all their clients and run the same thing. So building that out to a much larger scale, but making things reusable and simple for people is a big bit of it. So we're working on a wallet capability just now that's linked into our UK government work that we've got, and we're accredited by them as a provider for digital identity. So in effect, it's providing a means and a way for a law firm to onboard their client and manage all the compliance. And when they need to refresh that and redo it, they don't have a massive admin exercise to do it. And when a law firm wants to work with or have access to many more potential clients, we've now got almost 70,000 people a month who are running through Amiqus, from recruitment businesses, from government contracts from various places. And those people are looking for legal services, products, like different things that they can do online. So working in partnership with their law firms to help them understand what things they want to do and help enable in an online scenario or marketplace or network. So through the wallet capability that we're building out and working with law firms to help them drive and grow their businesses as well, it means we'll grow at the same time. So there's a lot of like two-sided value that we can help deliver, whether it's from adding in functionality like Vala, or being able to connect lawyers into, for example, here's a potential person who's looking for immigration support, and we can make all the admin really light touch, make sure they've covered all their obligations. And if it comes to a solicitor giving some advice to someone over their lunch break, like, we should make that happen. Like, we should make it simple, rather than, oh God, I'd love for the law firm to have a pro bono policy, but actually there's just so much work that we need to do to make it happen. Ideally, we can, join up all those dots.
Right, brilliant. Thank you very much, and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
So thanks very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying our content. We'd be delighted to hear any feedback that you have. You can find out more about the Your Law Firm Success podcast at mltdigital.co.uk/podcast. Please subscribe. Please share with your friends. Please share with anyone who you know that you think would be interested.